Throughout the centuries, the Bible has predicted the rise and fall of nations with 100% accuracy. Their destinies were history written in advance. But the Bible is not just a history book. Not every world power is mentioned, only the ones that directly affect God's people. Nations are brought into the biblical picture, not just as independent powers, but in the light of their role in God's overall plan. Like a chess game, the pieces are used in this controversy between Christ and Satan. In the past, Satan has worked through government to persecute and accomplish his means. In the last days of Earth's history, the final conflict will center upon the question of loyalty to God. Will America continue to be successful in its principles of religious liberty and freedom of choice, or will it one day deny the heritage that brought so many people to this land, escaping religious persecution? The First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution says that everyone in the United States has the right to practice his or her own religion, or no religion at all. Our country's founders saw the many different religions developing in the colonies, and they knew the history of religious persecution. They figured the best way to protect religious liberty was to keep the government out of religion, so they created the First Amendment to guarantee the separation of church and state. This fundamental freedom is a major reason why the U.S. has managed to avoid a lot of religious conflicts that have torn so many other nations apart. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment gives you the right to worship or not as you choose. The United States was established by courageous Europeans filled with an adventurous spirit, attempting to flee the religious and political tyranny of the Old World. It was not established by conquering another nation, but by the establishment of a new one. The oppressed and persecuted Christians have turned to this land, hoping to serve God according to the dictates of conscience. Millions have sought its shores, and the United States, blessed by God, has arisen to a place among the most powerful nations on earth. In the last episode, we identified that mysterious character of the Bible called the Antichrist when we studied Daniel chapter 7. The rest of the prophecies from the book of Daniel are carried over to Revelation chapter 13, which is the climax of the book, revealing the characters and the strategy of the enemy. Satan puts on the garments of Christianity and he tries to deceive the church from the inside, as Jesus warned us in Matthew chapter 7 verse 15.
Beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves.
In Revelation chapter 13, once again, God does a repeat and enlarged teaching. He repeats some of the characteristics of the Antichrist from Daniel chapter 7 to let us know it's the same power, the papacy, but then he enlarges with more information. This is God's style of teaching. It's called repeat and enlarge, and it's found throughout the Bible. After repeating the Antichrist, God then identifies one more world superpower that will play a pivotal role in Bible prophecy. This world superpower is key to understanding last day events, and once again, God gives us characteristics that only fit one world superpower, so we would know for sure the identity. As I mentioned in the last episode, God is not against people when he identifies the Catholic papacy as the Antichrist system of the Bible. There are many good people in the Catholic Church who have never heard these things before, and they are living up to all the light that they have, and God will work in their favor. We see the same events played out through the history of the Bible. God's people start out with good intentions, but gradually Satan slips in false doctrines and traditions. One example would be the Jewish nation, chosen by God, as the Apostle Paul says in Romans chapter 3 verse 2.
Much every way, chiefly because that unto them were committed the oracles of God.
The Jewish nation was entrusted with the scriptures and the law of God. If that wasn't a blessing enough, they also had the Messiah come through their lineage, and it was their job to present the Messiah and the scriptures to the world. But God's people, the Jewish nation, had misinterpreted the prophecies of the Messiah, and they persecuted the truth. During his 3.5-year ministry, Jesus pleaded with the leaders of the Jewish nation, but was eventually condemned to death. We should not think the church is immune to the same mistakes. Just as the Jewish nation misinterpreted the prophecies, so has the church, unfortunately, in our day.
I have done many good deeds in your presence, which the Father gave me to do. For which one of these do you want to stone me?
We do not want to stone you because of any good deeds, but because of your blasphemy. You're only a man, but you're trying to make yourself God.
The book of Revelation is written in symbolic language. The Apostle John is seeing visions of symbols explaining future events. These symbols are explained throughout the Bible. Of the 404 verses in Revelation, 279 of them make some allusion to the Old Testament. Think of the rest of the Bible as a code book to explain the symbols in Revelation or Daniel. We are never to guess at the symbols, but to look at Scripture for the answers. Daniel and the Apostle John were both in captivity when writing these prophecies. God didn't use symbols to confuse us, but so the enemy would not see themselves in the messages and attempt to tamper with them, change them, or destroy them. To understand Revelation, you must let the Bible interpret itself. The book of Daniel chapter 7 is key to understanding Revelation chapter 13, which was covered in the last episode. But here is a quick review. Daniel has a vision of 4 beasts, a lion, bear, leopard, and the last beast was a frightful monster. Daniel 7:23 explains that a beast in Bible prophecy is a symbol for a kingdom, nation, or you could even say a world superpower. The 4 beasts represent these 4 nations. The lion represents Babylon, the bear was Medo-Persia, the leopard represents Greece, and last was the frightful monster that represented the Roman Empire. Out of the Roman Empire came the little horn of Daniel chapter 7, also known as the Antichrist, which we identified as the Roman Catholic papacy. In Revelation chapter 13, the Roman Catholic papacy is known as the beast from the sea, but that's not the only world superpower mentioned. There's a second beast in Revelation chapter 13 that comes up out of the earth. The second beast, or earth beast, is who we want to identify next. The Bible gives us 7 clues to identify this other world superpower, so we do not have to guess. Now, let's begin Revelation chapter 13 to identify the other world superpower. Listen carefully as John describes the first beast, the Roman Catholic papacy, coming up out of the sea, using all the characteristics from the beast in Daniel chapter 7.
Revelation 13. And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power, and his seat and great authority.
The Bible's imagery is never random. The attributes of each of the 4 beasts from Daniel chapter 7 are mingled into this one beast from the sea. The Church of Rome has incorporated many of the pagan systems of worship from previous nations into its own practices. It is an amalgamation of religious and political elements from the 3 kingdoms that preceded it: Greece, Medo-Persia, and Babylon. The dragon is Satan himself, working through the pagan Roman Empire. Satan gave his power, his throne, and great authority to the Roman Empire. Satan tried to destroy Christianity through Roman persecution, but when that didn't work, he decided to corrupt the Christians through the deceptions of the Catholic Church. The Roman Empire became the Roman Catholic Church.
And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months.
In Revelation chapter 13 verse 5, it gives us a timeline of how long the first beast would dominate the world. It says power was given unto the first beast to continue 42 months, which is 3.5 years, or 1,260 days. It is based off a 30-day Jewish month. This is the same time period mentioned in Daniel chapter 7 verse 25, but pay close attention. This is a prophecy code. The average person looks and sees 1,260 days, but in Bible prophecy, each day equals 1 year. So the time period God is revealing to us is actually 1,260 years. The day for a year principle is used in many verses throughout the Bible, but here's a few examples.
And when thou hast accomplished them, lie again on thy right side, and thou shalt bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. I have appointed thee each day for a year. After the number of the days in which ye search the land, even 40 days, each day for a year, shall ye bear your iniquities, even 40 years.
Also, in Daniel chapter 9 verse 24 is another prophecy called the 70 weeks of Daniel. In this prophecy, each week equals 7 years, not 7 days. So we know the day for a year principle is a well-established fact of prophecy. The rule of the Catholic papacy began in 538 AD and continued until 1798. During this time period, the papacy had an uninterrupted power over God's people. But in 1798, Napoleon's general Berthier took the Pope captive with hopes of destroying both Pope Pius VI and his political power. This is an exact fulfillment of the 1260-year prophecy to the very day. Only God could know these things beforehand. Revelation chapter 13 verse 3 helps us to understand that 1798 is a deadly wound to the papacy. It would seem to be going away forever, but its deadly wound would be healed, and the papacy would regain its power again before the end of time, and we are seeing that fulfillment today. In 1929, Mussolini signed the Lateran Treaty, making the Vatican an independent state, followed by President Reagan in the 1980s acknowledging the Catholic Church as an independent country by an appointment of an American ambassador to Vatican City. The rest of the Verse states and all the world wondered after the beast. The Catholic Church has become a very powerful religious and political power to be reckoned with on a global scale, having followers all over the world and recognition from the most powerful leaders on earth. Now, with those verses, we have a few clues to identify the next beast. The first clue was the Roman papacy rose up out of the water, or sea. In Revelation 17:15, it tells us that water represents people, multitudes, nations, or tongues, which means the papacy came up out of a heavily populated area. The second beast we are trying to identify comes up out of the earth, which would be the opposite of water or a heavily populated area, meaning the second beast comes up out of an unpopulated area. The next clue tells us that the second beast came up at the same time the papacy was going into captivity, which would be around 1798. Then we are told the second beast is a lamb-like beast. A lamb is always used to describe Jesus in the book of Revelation. So this would mean it would have Christian-like qualities in the beginning. Now, just with those three clues, there's only one world superpower that came up around 1798 in an unpopulated area that had Christian-like qualities. So hold on to your seat, because it can be no other than the United States of America. But to be certain, let us go through the characteristics one by one to leave no room for doubt. In Revelation chapter 13, we find 7 clues to identify the second beast as the United States of America. The first clue, the U.S. arose to power around the same time the papal system received its deadly wound. Number 2, the U.S. arose out of a desolate area compared to the papacy, which came up in Western Europe. Number 3, the second beast is depicted as a new world power on the scene. It says another beast in verse 11. Number 4, the second beast is described as a republic, not a monarchy. It has 2 horns without crowns. Number 5, the second beast, the U.S., was to have worldwide influence. Number 6, it is described as a lamb-like beast, meaning it would have Christian-like qualities. Number 7, it would start as a lamb, but end up speaking like a dragon, it says in verse 11. The first clue we're going to look at is the United States arose at the right time. The context of the prophecy starts in Revelation chapter 13, verse 10.
He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and faith of the saints. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon.
Here we have the prophetic history of the first beast or kingdom introduced in Revelation chapter 13, the papacy. This power received a deadly wound in 1798 when the Pope was taken into captivity by General Berthier and the papal government was abolished. The second beast or power predicted rises from the earth to worldly fame in the time frame of the captivity of the first beast. That would be the late 1700s, which is the very period when the United States as a nation was rising to power. In 1776, the Declaration of Independence was drawn up. In 1787, the Constitution was written, and in 1789, the Bill of Rights was formulated. In 1791, the Bill of Rights was adopted. In 1798, the Pope was taken prisoner by Napoleon's general Berthier. This same year, in 1798, the United States was recognized as a nation by France, the same power that inflicted the deadly wound on the first beast, the papacy. The United States arose exactly as prophecy has predicted. It's exciting to see how the book of Revelation comes to life when prophecy is fulfilled.
When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, a decent respect requires that they declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to establish new government. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, do, and with the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved of all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved. In the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
This incredible, inspired document has echoed around the world. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As these brave men fought for freedom and history was being made, Bible prophecy written 1700 years earlier was being fulfilled. Clue number 2 in Revelation chapter 13 is the first beast, the Catholic papacy, comes up out of the sea or water. We are told in Revelation chapter 17 verse 15 that water represents people, multitudes, nations, or tongues, or you could say a heavily populated area. This gives us a very important clue to identify the second beast, the United States, which comes up out of the earth. By describing the second beast in contrast of the first beast coming up out of a heavily populated area, the second beast coming up out of the earth could only mean a sparsely populated area. This is exactly what we see with the founding of the United States. The American Indians were very few compared to the size of the land. The majority of the land and nature was completely untouched in the United States. When you combine this clue with the others, it is no doubt whatsoever the Bible can only be referring to one superpower nation coming up in a sparsely populated area in the late 1700s. We also find a reference to the word earth in Revelation chapter 12, used to describe the United States as a place of refuge for persecuted Protestants. In verses 6 and 14, the woman, which represents God's church, is described as fleeing into the wilderness or a desert place to escape the persecution of the Dark Ages. The persecution is described in verse 15 as a flood of waters. This represents the people, multitudes, nations, and tongues of Europe who were persecuting the faithful, those who followed the Bible instead of the state religion, Catholicism. The key verse is in Revelation chapter 12, verse 16.
And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth, and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth.
It was the earth that helped the woman escape the persecution of Europe. History testifies to the fact that America became a sanctuary for liberty-loving Protestants. The land of America eventually established freedom of religion for all the faiths, and swallowed up the persecuting flood of the nations of Europe. When Bible prophecy is applied correctly, it is truly amazing how accurate the predictions are. Clue number 3, the second beast is depicted as a new nation. The Apostle John saw another beast rising up from the earth. As we have learned, a beast in Bible prophecy is a world superpower. Also, John describes the second beast as a young lamb. Compared to all the other beasts described in the Bible as adult animals, God is letting us know this is a newborn nation. The fact that the beast is just rising makes it a newcomer on the world stage. The United States broke away from England and all its European roots and eventually became a new nation, a separate power. Clue number 4, it was to be a republic and not a monarchy. The second beast, the United States, is described as having 2 horns like a lamb in verse 11. Horns are a symbol of a kingdom's power, but notice that these 2 horns have no crowns upon them. Compare this to the first beast or kingdom, described as having upon its horns 10 crowns in verse 1. This new kingdom of America would not be a kingly power as its predecessor had been. This was a revolutionary idea, to have a nation for the people and by the people, unlike the countries in Europe who had kings to rule over the lower class. America would be marked by both religious and political liberty, and these principles would be her strength. The United States established 2 separate authorities, political and religious. The principle of complete separation between church and state was represented by the 2 horns like a lamb.
And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon, and he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed.
Clue number 5. This kingdom was to have worldwide influence by exercising all the power of the first beast before him, whose deadly wound was healed. From 538 AD to 1798, the Catholic papacy was a world superpower. It controlled kings and queens. These verses are telling us the United States will follow in the footsteps of the first beast, the papacy. We could probably say without hesitation that there has never been a time in its history when America fits this aspect of Bible prophecy as it does presently. America has become a global power very quickly, even controlling the economies around the world. As it has been said, when America sneezes, the whole world gets a cold. When you think about it, it would be quite foolish to believe that America doesn't play a role in Bible prophecy. Clue number 6. It is a lamb-like power. In the Bible, and especially in prophecy, a lamb symbolizes Jesus Christ. In Revelation, the word lamb is used 28 times to describe Jesus. In Revelation 13:11 is the only time the word is used to describe something else. To describe this second power in Revelation 13:11 as having 2 horns like a lamb is to ascribe to it Christian-like qualities. This new world power, the United States, was a sanctuary for God's people, a nation adhering to the principles of Christianity as outlined in the Bible. Freedom is foundational to God's love and a major theme of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
If the Son therefore shall make you free, ye shall be free indeed.
When the Founding Fathers wrote the Constitution, they used Christian principles, and this is why the United States grew to world dominance. Also, its religious freedom provided a place for God's people to worship according to the Bible. It was upon these principles of republicanism and Protestantism that this great nation of America was founded, but prophecy predicts a terrible change in the future. Clue number 7. This power will change in character from a lamb to a dragon. It says in verse 11, he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. How does a nation speak? A nation or kingdom speaks through its laws or legislative body. The prediction of Bible prophecy is that the nation of America, established with Christian qualities, will start to pass laws that go against the principles of the Bible. As I said earlier, this is a common theme throughout history. God's people start out with good intentions, but over time, Satan chips away at these principles. We have already seen the decay and decline of America's morals during the 20th century at a record pace. The Bible describes some of the problems government will have to face in the end times, such as social upheaval, economic difficulty, natural disasters, international war and conflicts between nations, famines, pestilence, and earthquakes in various places, and a moral decline throughout the population. All of these problems that government faces will cause them to pass laws restricting freedom to correct the issues. Since 9/11, Americans have been prepared to give up freedoms for safety. We have seen more of a militarization of our neighborhood police to deal with the increase in crime.
So-called warrior cops, a term that I've heard, and the militarization of police. I think it's very important to remind our fellow citizens that we need a range of weapons and equipment to respond and protect our fellow citizens and protect ourselves. Threat!
We are at war, and you are the frontline troops in this war.
We are preparing for any type of situation. Of course, anything dealing with ISIS is a concern. We do a lot of training in the event that we had a situation like what they had in Missouri.
We have the right to assemble peace. You are violating the state laws of curfew. We have the right. That is our right.
There's actually written descriptions for how the equipment should be used, and says it's specifically not supposed to be used for riot suppression.
In the very near future, you will be vindicated.
Clear. There's gotta be some drugs here.
The United States has slowly been changing in character over the last 100 years, from a lamb to a dragon. Satan will use America like he used the Roman Catholic Church during the Dark Ages. Satan will work through government to accomplish his means. All of this might sound impossible. Why would America follow in the footsteps of the Roman Catholic Church and restrict religious freedom? Our leaders are facing unprecedented problems in the near future. Things like climate change, drug epidemics, overpopulation, and increasing violence. Things God warned us would come. In search of solutions, politicians and religious leaders will join together, trying to get this country back to God, as some say. The Supreme Court can play a major role in laws passed in the United States. Of the 9 Supreme Court justices, 6 of them are Roman Catholics currently. It will not only be Roman Catholics pushing for this change of law or legislation, but also Protestant America will join hands with the Catholics to pass legislation. When identifying the second beast of Revelation chapter 13 as the United States, this includes the Protestant churches who have a huge influence in this country and played a major role in our last presidential election. Do not underestimate these two powers combined, Catholicism and Protestantism, which makes up over 2 billion people globally. What I'm trying to explain is that there will be a law passed that is known in the Bible as the mark of the beast. Revelation chapter 13 is the climax of the book of Revelation. In this chapter, it gives you the two key players of the end-time events that we identified as the Catholic papacy and the United States. But when identifying the U.S., it specifically identifies the two horns, which represents church and state. Verse 14 says the U.S. will make an image to the first beast, the papacy. The word image is not like a carved idol, but it means the U.S. will do something in the likeness or similar to what the papacy did in the Dark Ages, like restrict religious freedom. Then verse 15 says the U.S. will both speak and cause. A nation speaks through laws or legislation, and when it says it will cause, this means it will enforce the laws or legislation. Those who do not obey will lose their freedom to buy and sell. Eventually, the issue escalates to the death penalty for those who do not obey. Wait a second. Are you telling me that God's people, the Catholic Church, and the Protestant churches of America will bring about laws enforcing some kind of restriction on religious freedom? That's exactly what I'm saying, because that is exactly what Bible prophecy is telling us. Once again, let me remind you, it was God's people who persecuted Jesus Christ, not some atheist group. The Roman governor Pilate, who was a pagan, tried to set Jesus free multiple times, declaring, "I find no fault in him."
Pilate therefore went forth again, and saith unto them, Behold, I bring him forth to you, that ye may know that I find no fault in him. When the chief priests therefore and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him! Crucify him! Pilate saith unto them, Take ye him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him. The Jews answered him, We have a law, and by our law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God.
God's people, the Jews, were the ones doing the persecution. Many religious leaders misinterpret the book of Revelation, and they teach that persecution will come from some outside atheist or Muslim group, but that is not at all what Bible prophecy is saying. Revelation chapter 13 gives us the identity of the Catholic papacy and the United States as the source of the coming persecution. But the mastermind behind all of it is Satan. He's controlling these world superpowers from behind the scenes. Every time church and state unite, the results are never positive. This is why our forefathers knew separation of church and state is always necessary, and they created the First Amendment. The First Amendment is in place so a powerful religion does not compel the government to do certain actions or force particular beliefs on people who do not share those conclusions.
They shall put you out of the synagogues, yea, the time cometh, that whosoever killeth you will think that he doeth God service.
Jesus warned his disciples that a time would come that whosoever kills you will think that he does God a service. The times in history when the most human lives are lost is done in God's name. There is coming a time in the very near future when people will think they are working for God and they will restrict religious freedom. We only have to look at history to see the results of church and state united. In the Dark Ages, the Church of Rome was united with state in laws and legislation. The Roman Catholic Inquisitions killed millions upon millions of people, lasting over 600 years. And this is a well-known fact of history. You can still visit the old European churches today that have basements with medieval torture devices, and we are talking about tactics and devices developed to inflict the most inconceivable pains upon the human body imaginable. Devices that I'm not even comfortable showing. They would use these devices to correct heretics or make someone recant their statements against the church. In 1998, Pope John Paul II made documents available for a limited time revealing the horrors of the Inquisitions and confirming what we already knew. He admitted it was a very dark time in the history of the Catholic Church. The horrors of the Inquisitions explains why the founders of America gave us the First Amendment, the separation of church and state. The religious and political powers that are currently trying to break down those barriers, They do not realize what they are doing. When pushing for this legislation, they will do this under the expectations of the common good. It is extremely hard for us to picture America, the land of religious freedom, doing anything like this, but may I remind you that Bible prophecy is never wrong. The Pope is the most powerful man on earth, and he represents the largest religion in the world. He has been working eagerly to unite all the world leaders and religions globally, and he has been successful, speaking to the United Nations, U.S. presidents, Congress, Protestant church leaders, famous actors, Russia, Middle East leaders, Muslim and Jewish, China, India, and many others. They all love and respect his leadership. The Pope is trying to get global laws passed using climate change as the reason, which on the surface seems great, but it will have eternal consequences. If you think this is some distant future issue, you would be terribly wrong. Current events and prophecy is telling us this will soon be a reality. The Pope has called for all the world leaders to come to the Vatican to sign a global climate change agreement. Hidden in plain sight will be a law that leads to the enforcement of what's known in the Bible as the mark of the beast.
And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand, or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name.
The majority of the world will accept the mark of the beast, the Bible says, because they have no idea what it even is. 95% of the churches in America will receive it because the religious leaders have never explained it correctly or never talk about it at all. Satan has been successful at distracting us with entertainment. The average American is biblically illiterate, and the rest don't actually take the Bible seriously. And maybe you fit into one of these categories. It's not too late to start studying the Bible or to give your time to God. There are all kinds of ridiculous theories on what the mark is, from barcodes, tattoos, and microchips. But let's put aside ridiculous theories and just go to the Bible to find out. God would never leave us in the dark on something that causes us to lose our salvation. So please join me for the next episode to identify the mark of the beast from the Word of God.
And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation, and he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up for ever and ever, and they have no rest day nor night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name.